Services at Denver Health Medical Center. I live in Firestone with my husband and two boys. One is almost 17 and one is 13. My career history. So I started off at Denver Health in the progressive care unit as a new graduate nurse. And critical care is my background clinically, and my love at first, of course, for healthcare. And in the critical care division, I moved through leadership, was able to get a charge nurse position, and then became the manager of the surgical intensive care unit. After quite a few years of that and leadership, I ended up becoming the director of critical care, and was director for critical care for 3 years, and during that time was nursing director also over maternal child health for about a year when we had some turnover. So I've had a lot of great experiences and been able to look across departments and just excellence in nursing and excellence in care are two priorities of mine, of course, I think like a lot of us. And then also employee engagement is a huge focus of mine. And I feel like sometimes I have to focus on that because I don't always see leaders around me doing the same. And I think it's one of the most important pieces of care for our patients. So that's something that I've been really focused on. After being a critical care director for about 3 years, I was asked to come and fill in as we had some turnover in perioperative services. And that turned into really a long-term job. So I've now the director of perioperative services at Denver Health. I've been in periop for about 3 years. And during all of that, I have always had a pursuit of education and knowledge, and also don't really know what I want to be when I grow up quite yet. So I do have a master's in business and a master's in nursing that I was able to get through a dual program. I think that was in 2015 or 16. I'd have to look, to be honest with you, to tell you when I graduated. It was all kind of a blur, but never really expected to be in a DNP course until I heard about this one. And I heard about this course from a colleague, and my colleague Kelly and I have been in this cohort together. She actually just had a baby, so that's why if you miss seeing her in our thread, she's out with her newborn, and they're both doing really well. So when she brought it to me, I was like, of course, this looks like a great option. And so we kind of explored it, and I have had nothing but a great experience since. So in my classes up to now for my practicum project, I've wanted to focus on shared governance because I work with amazing people at the bedside who need to have their thoughts and opinions make a difference and make a change. And to be honest with this team, I've had quite a hard time focusing in on that category just because of the low level evidence that is in the literature around shared governance. It's really not you can't find randomized controlled trials. It's not the same type of research when you get into a leadership perspective. So in a couple of classes, I've shifted my focus to OR efficiencies and I think that's what will probably fit best in this course as well, as it is something that's got higher level research and just more quantitative analysis. So yeah, I think I covered everything, but let me know if I missed anything.
Do you have thoughts about a PICO question at this point?
I mean, I've had quite a few PICO questions. For shared governance, it was around which intervention was most successful regarding employee engagement around shared governance. But again, there's just really not enough data out there for that. So my PICO question currently for OR efficiency, it was centered around which metric, which intervention out of, I think, 3 different prominent ones in the literature would really impact OR efficiency, and that is in the metric form of reducing the downtime during the most efficient times of the work day in the OR. So that's the one that I'd like to look into a little bit more to see if there's one intervention I want to focus in on, or if it's a comparative through interventions. So any advice would be wonderful.
And do you have an advisor at this point?
Yes, I've reached out to Mary Beth Mackick
Okay,
for an advisor, and then also at my at Denver Health, it'll be my clinical site, and our nursing director of education and research, her name's Jama Gores. She's going to be my local advisor as well.
great. Mary Beth will be great for you. And
Yes.
I would go with her
Mhm.
expertise on whether or not there's enough evidence around the shared governance. Peggy, do you have any thoughts?
Well, there's a lot out there. I mean, Tim Porter O'Grady was the
Mhm.
guru to start with, and you can't always find you often can't find
Yeah.
RCTs when you're looking at system level
Right.
constructs. And you know, he's advanced it to he doesn't call it shared governance anymore. He calls
Right.
it professional. So if
Yeah.
you've been into all that literature, but there's a lot out there.
Yeah. Thank you. I agree, and I will definitely be working with Mary Beth on that. Thank you both.
Yeah, and I would just share the same thoughts along the lines of Peggy, is that especially in the systems level stuff and the leadership stuff, you may not have RCTs. So,
Mhm.
and Christine's nodding her head as well. So I think we're all in agreement that you still could frame this as a quality improvement project based on the state of the science if there's not an RCT. So, so work closely with Mary Beth, but know that it's acceptable
Okay.
for this course and probably for your project. Great.
Awesome.
Thank you for.
Thank
And
you.
just to add on, I would say it's okay if there isn't an RCT. I know that's typically what we hold as the gold standard, but oftentimes depending on what you're looking at, what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, there just may not be that level of literature out there. And also thinking about after you're done with the program and how can you move the needle where you work and what are the important things to continue that, to carry that work forward as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
So thank you, Nicole, for doing that. I am assuming in front of your family, which I never feel comfortable doing this kind of stuff with my boys in the
Yes, this
car.
is my
So
husband. Yeah.
good morning. They probably learned something about you that they didn't know before.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you for
Thank you
going,
so much.
and good luck with your appointment.
Thank
So
you.
now we'll go to Christina.
All right, that was great though, hearing Nicole. I love Denver Health. My husband worked there for 15 years and the people that work there are just amazing how they serve the patients. So that was really amazing to hear her story. So my name's Christina Baker. I'm in the second year of the PhD program in healthcare systems. And I'm nodding my head about RCTs also because I'm really learning that doesn't always have to be the gold standard, really. And for what I'm doing, I really couldn't even do a controlled study. So I have worked in pediatrics for about 30 years in hospital, outpatient settings, and then in school health. And I'm currently at Children's Hospital Colorado. I've worked there in nursing informatics and doing part-time in school health right now. I did get my master's in healthcare informatics from the College of Nursing in about 2014. And I did start out as an MPH student, but got the certificate, got a grant to do this high-tech program for informatics, thought it would be important for me to learn about informatics, and then ended up going that way instead of the MPH. My inspiration to be in the PhD program came from being a pediatric nurse research fellow through Children's Hospital. It's an amazing program they have. They give you a little bit of time each week to meet with the nurse scientist, and Bonnie actually was my mentor and advisor. She's carried me through the last couple of years doing the research project, and I'm finally, after 2 years of data collection, we are doing the data analysis, and then I'll be able to submit, hopefully actually 2 2 publications, one on school nurse and clinic nurse surveys that we did, and then also on patient outcomes. So my study was about using health information technology, so using the EHR as an intervention, giving that access to school nurses and seeing how that affects the students' ED and hospital admissions. And then also a survey that really asked the clinic and school nurses how this EHR access affects their being part of a coordinated team and also their access to health information. So let's see, what else? Anything else, Bonnie?
Yeah, if you want to tell us what you're thinking your research question for this course might be.
Yes. All right. So now that I've done that pilot study, I actually want to focus more on kids with type 1 diabetes. As a school nurse, that is probably, if you have a kid with type 1 diabetes, that can actually really change your practice in how much time you spend and how much training you have to do. Even though you're given the same amount of time, you actually have to end up spending a lot more time. So it's to be more efficient in communication and getting orders for those kids, especially when their orders change around their carb ratios, all of that, their pumps, all their technology. If you don't have access to real-time accurate information, it really can be devastating for the child, obviously. And then we have to teach staff, so we have to know right away to go in and redo whatever training we've done to bring them up to speed, because we're usually not in the school. It's unlicensed people that we're training. So I'm sorry, my aim 1 was to conduct a comparative study of school nurse EHR access versus no EHR access on patients with type 1 diabetes outcomes. So the hypothesis 1 was the hemoglobin A1C will be lower in children with type 1 diabetes when the school nurse has access to the EHR. And the number 2 hypothesis, there will be a decrease in emergency room and hospital visits for children whose school nurse has access to the EHR compared to children whose school nurse does not have access to the EHR. And then I hope to examine also another aim, parents and healthcare providers' experience of care coordination when the school nurse has access to the EHR. So I was able to find a pediatric integrated care survey that Boston Children's and someone actually at Children's created. And they said they thought it would be appropriate for using this with kids with type 1 diabetes and the parents' experience of care. And then also I hope to interview with focus groups, the healthcare providers at the Barbara Davis Center for Diabetes, and then the diabetes resource nurses there.
So for the purpose of this course, Christina, I would pick one of those to kind of focus on, and definitely the focus groups are for your qual class, not for this one. Do people have thoughts, feedback, comments for Christina?
Hey, Christina, it's Lorraine.
Hey.
I wasn't sure within the full introduction and description you gave, did you state what you're going to try to do in this course for turning yours into a quantitative study?
Yeah, so that'll be looking at the hemoglobin A1Cs at the kids and then the emergency room and hospital visits.
Okay, I missed which one it was going to be. And then is that, I think when Bonnie said that she suggests that maybe you pick one?
I think she said don't do the aim 2 with the focus groups, but because that's qualitative. I just kind of read out my whole thing, my F1, so sorry.
Yeah, I think, Christine, if you focus on
Does that
aim 1, that would work for this course.
Okay. Yeah.
So
thank you for the question, Lorraine.
Oh, sure. Over a year plus, I know a lot about your work.
Whether you wanted to or not.
Closely.
and you yours also. I've learned so much. And I hopefully, I guess, Bonnie, I want to use this pediatric integrated care survey as the tool that I'm gonna critique.
That's great.
All right.
That's great.
Thank you.
And those are examples, guys, of ways to make this course help you get toward your long-term goal. So any other thoughts or comments for Christina? Skylar, I think you're next.
Hi, let me see if I can start my video real quick. Oh, it's not working for some reason.
We saw your weather on the news here. With the
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of a mess yesterday. It seems to have cleared up for the most part. It wasn't quite as windy last night, but
Good.
yesterday we didn't have any power and missed a lot of the meeting because I kept reconnecting on my phone and wasn't working out so great. But today I think we're good and ready to go. But my background, I graduated nursing school in 2008 and I started working in a surgical and pediatrics unit. It's kind of a part of a smaller hospital in the area. And then in 2011, I started working in managed care and have been in a couple different areas of utilization management there. For the past 6 years, I've been in quality management working as a project manager. So I work specifically with Medicare Advantage membership. And so the main project that I'm involved in is I audit the utilization management nurses and how they handle expedited pre-authorization requests. So there's a lot of regulations and guidelines that CMS requires, and they do program audits, and I am part of those, sitting there and presenting those cases. And so really involved in that aspect of CMS and their auditing, and then also kind of what the nurses do. And so any other programs involved with that, trying to improve like our timeliness metrics and the friend, like if letters are friendly for members. And then anytime there's a regulation change, I'm involved in getting our processes up to speed. So two of the reasons that I wanted to pursue my doctorate is, one, I kind of felt like I wanted to finish the degree for kind of a sense of completion. I did already have a master's at this point that was also in leadership and management. And then the other one was just to open up any new opportunities in my nursing career. So something about me, I have 3 cats. I live in Utah, and then I enjoy things like camping, cooking, and ATVing and home improvement projects. So for project ideas, there's a couple that I've been discussing with my employer, and one of them is around our annual employee engagement survey. And so I don't know any specific interventions on that yet because the results haven't come out yet. They should be coming out within the next week or two. And then we were going to talk about anything specific there. I kind of toyed with the ideas of looking at structured developmental programs, mentoring programs, kind of ways to develop the staff professionally. So there's other opportunities to see if that would affect the employee engagement scores. And the other area is more specific to like the quality department that I work in. And that's how we conduct like root cause analysis and corrective action plans. So a lot of times those are kind of just pinned individually on people, like they just made this mistake, human error, instead of looking at the whole process and doing an analysis there, like what are the gaps in our workflows. And so that would be kind of a push to try to change the culture, go for more of a just culture, and also kind of thinking more on a system level. And so I thought about maybe the project should have a committee that does these reviews and asks the questions, well, why is this happening? And keep asking the question until it gets down to the point where it's actually on a system level and something that we can improve on. But as far as PICO questions, I don't have anything specific there yet, but I think that in the employee engagement area, it would be if a specific developmental strategy or technique actually has an impact on the employee engagement scores. And if I end up doing it on the corrective action or the root cause analysis process, it would be if using like a committee to review these or changing the culture actually impacts the timeliness metrics or the specific metrics that we report internally to kind of monitor how we're doing with our Medicare program.
Great. And have you been assigned an advisor yet?
I don't have an advisor yet.
That's probably another thing you'll want to put in place to run the PICO question by the advisor as we move through. Peggy, any thoughts?
Skylar, we can talk about who might be an advisor for you if we want to have a conversation offline.
Okay, that would be great. Thanks.
Skylar, this is Christine. I just have a couple of thoughts. So the annual employee engagement survey, they do that annually, obviously, yes?
Yeah, that's correct. So it actually
So-
takes place in August and then the results come out in September.
Okay, and so do you think there might be any utility looking at trends from the past few years in addition to the current survey?
So I think there probably is. The one big change is that the company that I worked for was acquired a couple years ago. And so this is the first year that it's actually the employee engagement survey under the new company's rules. So there might be some overlap in the data that's collected, but I would have to bring that up.
Okay, because that would be something to look at and consider if there's trends over time that are consistent. And then if you're thinking on the other end of process improvement, you know, you want to be done with the program at some point. So you also have to pick something that you can finish. And something like process improvement sometimes, or trying to change culture, can take a long time. So thinking about what your end goal might be, if it could be a component of that to move it forward, too, just to consider that.
Okay, that sounds good.
Hi, Skylar, this is Jill Erickson, and I just want to pipe in because I am also I co-chair the Employee Engagement Council, and we just had our engagement survey as well, and it was done by a different company who had done them the 2 years previously. And a lot of times if you follow up with the company who did it previously and the company that's doing it, they will give you the questions that they ask which align or which hit the same categories. So that's what we had to do, and that might be helpful.
Okay, that's a good idea. Thanks.
Anybody else have thoughts for Skylar? That's great. So I think I have Julie Creedon next.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Julie Creedon. I live and work in Chicago, Illinois. I am currently employed at Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago, which was formerly Children's Memorial. It happens to be where I started. I started as a nurse in the PICU. Shortly after that, loved cardiac surgery and went back for my master's in CNS and pediatric critical care. And as soon as I finished that program, I had moved into a clinical nurse specialist role within the cardiac surgery department, managing the patients in the CICU and doing a lot of teaching on the floor for patients going home. The surgeon I was working for told me, just keep going and get your nurse practitioner. And so I continued on, because at the time the master's and the nurse practitioner were not a combined program. And so I started my pediatric nurse practitioner and focused on primary care at that time. Well, number one, they didn't have an acute care program. And number two, I thought since I had my CNS and critical care, I would focus on primary care. And then continued to work as a nurse practitioner in the CICU for the next 18 years. And loved that. Never thought I would leave. We had about 100 APNs in our institution at that time, and I was leading the informal APP council, which just met in the back corner of a gymnasium on a monthly basis. And as most volunteer jobs go, you have the same people volunteering all the time. And so I was the squeaky wheel that was always going into the CNO and CEO's office asking for things, for advocating for the APPs. And so I think they got sick of me and decided that there should be a formal role. And fortunately, I was given the opportunity to move into a formal administrative role overseeing the professional development of our advanced practice providers. And at the time, I had no desire, but one of my mentors actually encouraged me to apply for the position. And I thought about, what would I want if I had this leadership position? What did I want for advanced practice? And so for the last 10 years, I've been in this leadership role, and it's evolved from an administrator to a senior director. And now I've been, this past year, appointed the Associate Chief Nursing Officer over the advanced practice providers, and we have over 350 APPs. Initially, I was very resistant to adding PAs to our group. We're a very nursing-centric hospital, and really over the last 4 or 5 years embraced our PA colleagues and everything that they have to offer. And we finally decided to move from the APN PA branding to actually APP, Advanced Practice Providers. I think that messaging has been really important in the institution, as now we are calling our physicians providers as well. So when we're talking about providers, it's really all encompassing. And I appreciate that inclusivity that we've been able to add in. On a personal note, I decided to pursue my doctorate because I really appreciate what I'm doing, but I am in a freestanding academic children's hospital. We are Northwestern Memorial's and Northwestern's pediatric facility, but we have no financial affiliation with them. And so within our system, we are just a one-man show. And my ultimate goal is to really get into a health system and oversee advanced practice in a health system, ideally in Colorado. So if any of you are looking, please. But that is our ultimate goal. My two daughters went to college in Colorado, one at the Denver College of Nursing and the other at Colorado State. And so our competing Rams and Buffalo on the back of my car are good for the neighborhood. Anyway, my goal is the DNP and health systems leadership so that I can move forward in some type of a health system position in my future. My focus for my DNP project, or my PICO question, is an advancement model. I am in the process of creating and developing a professional advancement model to enhance and recognize the APPs in our institution, because we are not affiliated with a school of nursing. There's no faculty options. Our physicians are all on a faculty track, and our nurses are all on an RN clinical ladder. And so as advanced practice providers, we don't have that opportunity. So we are working with a group, and I'd really like to move this to fruition as my project. So when I think about my PICO question, I'm looking at, does the implementation of a professional advancement model impact either engagement scores in those that we put through a pilot to pilot out the entire application process and program that we've developed, Or do I look at retention scores? And so I think my limiting factor is really the time frame and what would best fit into the time frame of my DNP studies. Obviously, I will carry this to fruition throughout the entire, to its completion, and I want to measure all these things. But I'm thinking for the narrow time frame of the next 20 months is to really look at the engagement scores and the APPs involved in the pilot group. So do their scores go up pre-implementation of the program and then post? Or, and I'm open to the feedback from this group, am I looking at my comparative group is those who are engaged in the pilot study and those who are not? So I definitely know my focus, and how I narrow it down to be able to gather the right data and then tell the right story is really what I'm hoping to learn from all of you, and take any feedback.
Can you say any more about what the program what would the components of the program be, or the?
Sure. The professional advancement model consists of an application format where you apply and showcase all the things that we have been doing as professionals and leaders to enhance our practice, to promote our professional development, to what I call a lot is enhance our brand identity. So the more I have our APPs out presenting at national conferences, writing papers, participating in research, doing things in the local community, all of those things add up kind of in a point system, which then would determine what level you would be in. And right now we have 3 levels. Level 1 being more of an entry level, just getting your feet wet, becoming a clinical expert, those sorts of things. But level 3 or 4 really being involved in research as a PI, presenting at the national level, presence on national boards and international boards and things like that. So this then will offer the opportunity for financial recognition as well as some form of a title that we will include, so that there is this feeling of being recognized for your accomplishments and for your contributions to our practice.
So Julie, I'm a fellow Chicagoan, so I've been glad the Cubs have been back playing again. So just a few thoughts. Is this a model that's already been developed, or is this a model that needs to be developed?
We have developed the model. Yes, we've been working on that for about the last year, and we're ready for implementation of a pilot.
Okay, and so is it, I guess to Bonnie's question, is the structure of the model, is it a mentoring model? No. Is it just solely recognition?
Yes.
Okay.
And in recognition, one of the other factors that I will be looking at, but I just don't know if it fits into the time frame, will be turnover, our ability to recruit. So I'd like to look at it really broadly and look at recruitment. We know that our leadership model has improved in our recruitment, so I'd like to be able to show that this type of advancement model for recognition will also be beneficial in recruitment and retention and decrease turnover rates and ultimately improve, engagement and satisfaction.
Okay. And then have you consulted with other organizations? Have you looked at other APP models?
Yes.
Okay.
There's many around the country. Yes.
And are there others that have the purpose of this model, the same purpose?
What I'm going to say, and I have done not a completely exhaustive review of the literature, but a pretty comprehensive one. I will say that most that I've found published is the implementation of the model, and I haven't seen a lot of follow-up as to how successful it's been. Boston just printed, put an article out recently, but it was really about their process and not necessarily the results of it and the recognition and retention and things like that. So that's what I'd like to see this almost be like a 3-part series. Like, here's the implementation phase, here's how it played out, and then really do the follow-up phase long-term to say we did see a difference in engagement, job satisfaction, and ultimately retention and turnover.
Right. So I guess I'm just thinking about the PDSA cycle for a project, and implementing it might be that first step, and how it goes with implementing it
Yes.
within your system.
I feel like that's the pilot approach that we're talking about. Let's, instead of opening it up to all 350 of our APPs, what if we just do a small group to make sure it's going to be something that is useful and people will find worth the time and effort to put in. So I think that's the phase that I'm in right now and what I'm
Okay.
looking at.
Okay.
Are there other people who have comments? The good thing is you've got a lot of advanced practice people
Yes.
in this group. So if people have other thoughts, go ahead and chime in. And have you been assigned an advisor yet or no?
I believe yesterday Dr. Jenkins and I spoke and she will be my advisor. Yes, we had a conversation yesterday.
You may want to add somebody with advanced practice background as well, Peggy, don't you think? Do you guys have a committee?
Well, we talked about that, and she'll have her clinical mentor who will be advanced practice, but we can certainly add that. Yeah.
That sounds good. Exciting stuff. Anybody have any last thoughts for her? All right, I think we're ready for Jill Erickson.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So my name is Jill Erickson, and I just want to first of all say that I'm excited to be introduced to the rest of you, and it's really nice to be among you. A lot of you have done a lot of research, are very far along in your careers, and have done incredible things, and it's really exciting. So thank you for sharing. So I got my nursing degree. I started off with my ADN and I went right into critical care. I went straight into the intensive care unit. I finished up my bachelor's degree and my husband and I moved out to Colorado. And I continued in intensive care. I always loved critical care and I always loved the bedside. It is, in fact, a bit of a phenomena to me that I am in leadership in this place because I never imagined it. So then what occurred is I became the manager of the staffing office at Boulder Community Health when we moved out here. And I started up the staffing office. I created critical care pathways for nurses, created the float department, also the house supervisors. We had never had house supervisors. So it was a really interesting experience implementing this and taking very siloed departments and making them start to communicate and have some kind of workflow. So from that point, I decided to get my master's degree, and I got that through iLead through the University of Colorado Anschutz and in nursing leadership. And there was an opportunity that opened up, which was the director of mental health. And then also they were going to add on my department, nurse staffing resources. And I had always been really interested in mental health, especially as a bedside nurse and especially in critical care because within Boulder Community Health, all the M1 holds who have concurrent medical and mental health issues are placed in the ICU. So a lot of the patients I dealt with were in a crisis state. So I moved to that, and it's been an extremely interesting, humbling, and amazing experience. I have amazing teams that help me and support me, and it was really it's really been an education in leadership. So from that point, what else was I going to tell you? Some of my I also co-chair the Employee Engagement Committee. I chair the Falls Committee. And we, over the past 18 months, my departments have moved into a completely new facility, cutting edge facility, which has been so great and exciting, but it's also nerve-wracking taking because I have a procedural area, I have clinics, I have inpatient units, moving all of those, getting the workflow for them, especially when it's one of your units is a locked psychiatric unit. You want to make sure you're going in and you are, everybody is very, very educated. One of the fun things we are doing with our new building is on the inpatient unit, they installed circadian rhythm lighting, which is lighting that essentially just cuts out the blue spectrum. So at a certain time in the afternoon, slowly during the day, the light mimics the sun. And then in the evening, it really gets this beautiful golden glow and dims. And we are combining with the Department of Energy out of Oregon and also Boulder Associates to do a study about how this impacts staff and patient behavior. And they have just done the last data collection on it. And so we're really kind of excited to see how this works. Me especially, because I worked 12 years as a bedside night nurse, and you're always told that you're at higher risk for certain forms of cancer, autoimmune disease. So I'm really excited about the implications for this. Another thing that really happened is when I came in, the psychiatry group were all psychiatrists, and they were all very protective. And it was an interesting relationship leadership experience, because I was able to replace and integrate APPs, psychiatric MPs, into the inpatient unit and the outpatient clinic. And I have to say, of all the initiatives and all the things we've done, it was one of the most positive as far as creating a good team dynamic, and also just quality of care, communication. So it's been really great. So a few more things about myself. I've been married for 22 years. I have 2 Italian Greyhounds, and I love potato chips, and I would live in yoga pants if I could. So the Zoom meeting world isn't entirely bad for me. As far as my project and my PICO question, there are 3 different projects I'm working on that I'm really looking for feedback. The first one is what we're just starting. So one of the struggles in my world is really finding the common language between the medical world and the mental health world. And what I mean is that for any kind of specialty care, generally providers can just hand off and say, oh, you need to go to a wound clinic, or you need to go to an endocrinologist. Well, with mental health, it's a huge umbrella term for a lot of things people don't understand. And one of the things in the inpatient medical world is that there's a lot of frustration from the staff and patients, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of support for patients with co-occurring or dual diagnosis. And they struggle on the inpatient units, and the staff struggle as well. And if in nursing being the science of caring, and caring being such an important part of somebody's healing, if someone doesn't understand what you're going through or feels like they can tough love you through a crisis, it can be very detrimental to people. So I have a nurse practitioner, a half-time nurse practitioner who is going to be starting a proactive psychiatric rounding. So what happens now is on the inpatient unit, it is up to the providers to call in a consult. So there is confusion on when to call a consult, what the reasons are, who does the medication management, all this kind of stuff. And so the providers don't feel incredibly supported. And so our APP is going to pilot on 2 different units, doing a proactive tool where she shows up and she does rounds with the intensivists and the staff, and can provide support and context for everyone. So I would be interested to mark that over like 3 to 6 months about length of stay for M1 hold patients in the ICU, if the proactive rounding does anything for these folks. The other one is that I got a grant approved for 2 years for a mental health nurse navigator. And so what this would be is for our inpatient unit, what I'm really curious and looking for is in adult patients discharged from an inpatient psychiatric unit, how does mental health RN navigation compared to no mental health RN navigation influence completed outpatient appointments over a 3-month period? And so our patients would discharge, the navigator would take over and would do the follow-up calls and see if they maybe they're not gelling with their therapist or their provider, and finding them some other. So I thought that might be a good one. The last one is because I am on the falls committee, so this isn't like too to like riveting or exciting, but it's so necessary. So we've had a lot of success on the inpatient units. Our fall program is really starting. We started a little over a year ago, just making sure our policy was consistent, having a post-falls huddle, all that kind of good stuff. And so now our inpatient falls are doing pretty well. We have reduced falls with injury substantially. Now we're kind of turning our focus on the emergency department because the Morse fall risk assessment that we use isn't validated for the emergency department. So another thing we could look at is how does an emergency department specific validated tool impact falls with injury within the emergency department.
So
that's what
have you been assigned an advisor yet?
No, I've been working with Dr. Jenkins primarily because my track for both my DMP, oh, and I should go back to that, my DMP is leadership, and so is my master's. And part of the reason I decided to pursue my DMP is because I love operationalizing, and I also am interested in teaching.
Great. So I'm a little worried about how broad the possibilities are for you and the scope of this class, because this research and or PICO question is due next week. So you're going to have to narrow it down to pick something, and my suggestion is where is there the most evidence to support that this would be a good quality improvement project? Christine, I see you nodding. Do you have other thoughts?
No, I agree in not knowing the literature in this area, but just thinking about the three possibilities that you have. The second one with the nurse navigator seems to be probably the most, well, just on the surface, straightforward. And I know that we do have that gap between inpatient and outpatient care and follow-up and continuity. That's just my 2 cents.
That's good. Thank you. That's what
Yeah.
I was leaning towards.
It's exciting. Amy, go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Jill, I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and I work in the inpatient and outpatient setting, and I love your ideas. I really connected with the nurse navigator, just because I can tell you that we see a lot of readmission into our unit because either the patients, are unable to get their medication, or even sometimes even that little nitty gritty thing about like doing a prior auth. So like, with our substance use clients, the Suboxone doesn't get authorized, or, you're right, they don't gel with their therapist. So I just wonder like what impact that would have, just not only on their mental health moving forward, but just readmission into the inpatient setting, because a lot of times we see that. So I think that's like such a brilliant idea.
Oh, that's great. Oh, I appreciate that. Thanks so much. I know we're really excited about it.
Wow, you're making a difference. Good work.
Thank you. So are you.
That's awesome. So I think the next person is Melissa, and we are only a third of the way through the list, and we're halfway through our time. So I guess we're going to have to go just a teeny bit quicker. Melissa, with that pressure, I'm handing it over to you.
Sounds good. My name is Melissa Florell, live in Kearney, Nebraska, which is right in the middle of the state along I-80. I'm going to go a little bit out of order because it just fits with my story. My family owns a family farm operation, corn, soybeans, cow-calf. All of my PhD cohort have time to time seen pictures of all of our animals and the random things we do on the farm. But I've always had an interest in rural health, specifically rural health policy. In 2006, I volunteered on a campaign which introduced me to a friend of mine who was finishing her PhD at Yale. She introduced me to her advisor, who is Dr. Sally Cohen, and at the time she was starting one of the first nursing policy management leadership programs that was offered in a hybrid delivery model, online, on campus, in the country, because I knew I wanted my master's in nursing and I knew I wanted to focus on policy and leadership. And so after I finished my master's degree, I worked as the state director of the Nebraska Nurses Association, and that brought a lot of policy work into my life. We, at that time, passed the transition to independent practice for our nurse practitioners. We passed whistleblower protection for our nurses who, under our Uniform Credentialing Act. I've always had a PhD on the horizon since even before starting my master's. I had looked at UNMC's dual or BSN to PhD track, but felt and it was the right thing to do to break that apart. I just felt I needed my kids to grow up, and honestly, I didn't want to take quantitative, and that kept me away from doing a PhD for about 10 years. But I got over that. So I currently teach at
Christina
UNMC.
and I promise to make this painless.
Sounds good. I teach at undergraduate health policy and population health at UNMC on the Kearney campus right now. My dissertation plan and the question right now does have a qualitative focus. How do rural people perceive the relationship between upstream health policy and rural health inequities? And how I thought, I haven't settled on a question, but I thought how I might define a quantitative aim would be to try to define or quantify a relationship between an upstream determinant and a specific rural health outcome. And honestly, I haven't done a lot of lit searching, but I felt that that was something, and it also fits in my overall program of research, maybe not specifically for dissertation, but it is certainly something I'd like to move toward in the future. So I guess that's where I'm at so far.
Who's your advisor?
Amy Barton.
Perfect. Okay, people have thoughts for Melissa?
So any thought about what specific upstream determinant you're looking at, or what population you're working with?
It would still be a rural population. If I could find Nebraska data, I would probably stay just because it's the most accessible to me. But that's where I've always gotten stuck thinking about a quantitative definition, because there hasn't been a lot of work done in specific upstream determinants linking, we've got all of this upstream determinant research, and then we have a lot of health outcomes research and not a lot of linkage. And so that's where I'm at. And I know I need to refine that quite a bit before next week.
Well, I guess I was thinking more understanding the rural population, and I also lived in Nebraska, but over on the east side by Omaha, and you don't have to go very far to find a rural population. No. But thinking about, are you looking, at the elderly population? Are you looking at the pediatric population? And that might drive some of your outcome and what you're looking at to link. And you might find that to be very different depending on what population you're looking at or what upstream determinant.
I thought I might look at some of the rural urban disparities that are documented and see if I can work it backwards to see what is the most well-defined in the data sets that I could come across, and then move up to a policy or a determinant upstream. But again, a lot of the work I've done over the last year has been looking at qualitative research. And so this is kind of a new venture.
Right. And I think you could potentially look at like a secondary analysis and linking some information as well, not maybe for this class per se, but as a possibility as well.
Okay. Thank you.
That sounds great. Any other comments for her? Thank you for going so quickly.
No
problem. Lorraine, you're up next.
Well, great, Melissa. Now I'm laughing because you just set a precedent for a condensed version, and here I go. So in the interest of time, since I am a career change nurse, I will skip almost all of my backstory, and that will save us a lot of time. The links in my journey to being where I am now, which is a year 2 student in the PhD program. And on the healthcare systems focus group is I came into the program with a form of my question. My background, even when I worked in research with my master's in sociology over 20 years ago, was I investigated field source ethnography for identifying community links to the maternal death rate among Black women in New York City. Literally, here we are in 2020 with all of the things that are now much more visible to us on a public stage. And my thesis 20 years ago was called Maternal Mortality in New York City, Sexism, Racism, and the Privileging of Healthcare. So in the form of a nurse, I am now in this PhD program. I'm very interested in nurse-driven outcomes. Specifically, I came in believing that what I would do is, in the form of my dissertation, somehow develop a study that pushed the evidence base forward further on labor and delivery nurses' influence on type of birth outcomes. In meta theory 2, for those of us who are on the PhD track, there was really significant shift for me where I am now primarily focused on the recent concept of obstetric violence globally. This is one of the things that is flipped. The rest of the world in low, medium, and high resource countries have been even legislating, defining, and working in the healthcare sector science of it for much longer and in a slightly more advanced way. The only way the concept exists prior to a concept analysis that I just published on concept analysis of obstetric violence in the United States all comes from the legal and advocacy sectors. So to switch what will likely be a qualitative question for my dissertation, and the form of that question, either through critical ethnography or phenomenology, would be what are labor and delivery nurses' experiences of obstetric violence in US hospitals. I'm feeling like now it's a very strong assumption based on a lot of literature review and research reviews by me, that a quantitative survey would not really go well because of how early the US is in its recognition of obstetric violence, even as an existing concept. There's a lot of related literature on abuse, mistreatment, related concept of obstetric racism. Almost all of that comes from medical anthropology and sociology. So my idea for this class, I've been looking at chapter 15 in the Portney and Watkins text and thinking about piloting a survey. So yes, I believe that qualitative research definitely needs to come first because of how little research exists and how little recognition there is of obstetric violence as a concept in the United States. I feel really strongly that I'm right about that, but in the interest of doing something quantitative, if I piloted a survey, I would be able to say.
Is there a survey?
No, there sure isn't. There is, the only thing that's come close in the US is looking, it's called the Giving Voice to Mothers study. There's nothing from nurse perspective. And the Giving Voice to Mothers study clearly is a survey of women who were pregnant, have given birth, or were postpartum. And even still, that's really recent. It's 2019, and those authors chose to go with still calling it mistreatment during pregnancy But no, there is no survey. In Spain, they did a really great interdisciplinary pre-post study to demonstrate that perceptions of obstetric violence are modifiable with education. They surveyed nursing students and medical students with a 33-item question on perceptions of obstetric violence. Because it's Spain, there's maybe 5 out of those 33 aren't relative to the norms, aren't relevant to the norms here in the US. But no, Bonnie, there's nothing.
So if we're talking, so I understand your passion is qualitative. I understand you believe the state of the science is that qualitative needs to come first, and I respect that. But you have to check off this course in your journey. So how are we gonna help you do that? And have it be somewhat related and meaningful. And so I guess let's brainstorm of what the question could be that would still be of interest to you in some way, that would be a solid quantitative question. So is there something possible? I'm gonna just throw out ideas, but do we know what the prevalence of obstetric violence is in the population? Is there a difference in that between, are there racial ethnic differences in that? Is there any quantitative question that you could ask that would still be meaningful? And Christine looks like she's got a thought.
Well, and so are you interested in looking at the healthcare provider's perspective? Are you interested in looking at a patient perspective? Because that could be very different too.
Yeah, it's absolutely different. The labor and delivery nurses are my primary population of interest.
Okay.
It's a very unique specialty in labor and delivery where, well, among everyone on here who may have been pregnant and given birth, the big surprise, unless you have private midwife care, even if you have a private OB provider, you are going to spend the majority of your time within the scope of the independent management and decision-making of the intrapartum care of the nurse, until they call one of us. I'm a midwife and a women's health NP. Until they call one of us to come and either intervene on an emergent problem or come and attend the birth. So no, it's the labor and delivery nurses. And I'm not averse to quantitative methods. If the state of the science were more established, I'd be very attracted to doing something that was mixed methods or even purely quant. But like you were just saying, Bonnie, the question has to match where we're at. And I'm not really.
So you need to come up with a question that you can answer with a quantitative. So it's not your passion, it's not your dissertation, it's not what you're going to do for the rest of your life. It's just a question that can be answered quantitatively for this course.
So then the formulation, because the selection of the wording in formulating qualitative questions, every word matters, which I'm sure is the same in a quantitative question. So if I were to survey the nurses, Christine, where you were asking who's my population of interest, what's the correct way to formulate a survey question? Then does it turn into what is labor and delivery nurses' understanding?
That's still qualitative unless you have a survey.
It could be something like, what is the prevalence? What are the differences? Because you could also look at it from nurses with 0 to 5 years of experience, 5 to 15 years. Looking at the patient's perspective, you could also see if are there differences in SES status, ethnicity for perceived
So for example, I liked that right there. Could I just say, what is the prevalence of recognition of obstetric violence by labor and delivery nurses? And I can collect all that information and find the differences, because honestly, my belief is it's all of it. My theoretical framework is social justice in nursing. It's very well established that every single marginalizing factor creates layered oppression on top of the fact that we're female for starters. So regardless of how somebody gender identifies, if you're pregnant and giving birth, you are a genotypic female and you are already placed in a certain category by the fact you're a female. If you layer race, socioeconomic status, religion, physical appearance, anything that you can think of that's a marginalizing factor, it affects treatment and outcomes, and that is well established in the literature.
So
do I
look at those studies and see if there is something that you can ask about that with a quantitative lens, and that can be what you propose. It doesn't have to be your passion, but it does have to be quantitative, because this is quantitative research methods course.
Oh, I'm good with that. As long as it's about childbirth, I'm passionate enough about it. I'll expand myself to anything.
And who's your advisor?
Denise Smith.
Great. Okay.
But I do have to pick one. I can't just collect the data in a survey and then see what the data shows me, or that's not how quantitative methods work.
You have to come up with a research question that can be answered quantitatively. And I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to the voice PowerPoint that we have on the research question. And then Christine's going to talk to you some about methods here in just a minute. You may need to chat with one or the other of us before you hand in that research question assignment, because the research question, the outline, and the proposal are a big chunk of this course grade. So let's help you get something that's doable from a quantitative perspective for the purpose of this course. And we've got some thoughts. So Julie's asking if this has to be a quantitative research for this course, or as a DNP, can the focus be qualitative? No. Everybody has to do something quantitative for this course. So if you have further questions about that, we better set up separate Zoom meetings for everyone, just to make sure if you have a qualitative question for your project or your dissertation, set that aside for now. Let go of it for just this course and focus on a quantitative question for this course. And it doesn't mean you have to ever do anything with it in the future, but for this course, and if it helps you, come up with a quantitative question that has nothing to do with your area of interest. But for this course, it needs to be a research question that can be answered quantitatively. You have to measure something that you'll have numbers to look at for the purpose of this course. Other thoughts for Lorraine before we move on? Let's see, who's next? Anne, another qualitative person.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Lorraine, I totally empathize with what you're going through as far as being having your qualitative path laid out. My name's Ann Gillespie, and I'm also a second-year PhD student. And my background is in pediatric hematology, oncology, nursing. The majority of my career has been working with children with cancer. And so, let's see. Sorry, you know what? Hold on a second, you guys. I'm really distracted right now. I have a gentleman here helping me with my thermostat.
Do you want to switch and go later?
I just realized I'm not going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Let's switch. Someone else go, and by the time that person's done, come back to me, and I can be 100% with you guys.
Yep. Amy,
okay.
you want to go next?
Thank you.
Okay. So my name's Amy Joachim. I am, right now, I am faculty at Thomas Jefferson University. I live outside of Philadelphia. And my career, I've been a nurse for about 21 years now, and my entire career has been in critical care. And several years ago, about 10 years ago, I guess, I started needing to get away from the bedside or looking into the future, thinking I can't do this for the rest of my life, physically. And I went back to school and I got my master's in nursing education at Drexel University in Philadelphia. And since that time, I have been doing adjunct clinical teaching. And then last year I was, and in that time, I knew I wanted to transition into a teaching role. So I was accepted into this program. And then a month after I was accepted, I got a phone call from a friend of mine saying, hey, we have a faculty position here. And I took it. So I've been teaching for a year, and I'm still doing clinical work about once a week, still in ICU. And so when I started this program, that's kind of where my ideas were. My colleagues know that I was kind of in a low nursing spot, not really happy with nursing and where I was. And so I was looking at moral distress. I was looking at end-of-life care with critical care nursing. And that's kind of, that was how I was trying to deal with what I was dealing with. But since then, through this past year, my focus has really changed, and I've become really excited about helping students transition into practice. And so that's kind of where I am now. And my advisor is Karen Sousa. And she helped me think of something along the lines of, and I was kind of basing this on Patricia Benner's theory, the novice to expert theory, and looking at the ways of knowing of expert nurses versus maybe advanced nurses, like in the 2-year range to 10-year range. And then more specifically for this class, I was thinking of looking at a specific part of the ways of knowing, like intuitive knowledge. And, how does a nurse with, either 2 to 5, that number can be more specific, years of experience, identify with or differentiate with, or whatever wording I can come up with, intuitive knowing into their practice compared to that of a nurse, with 10 plus years of experience. And I was looking, I didn't realize there was any scale. So that's last night I went digging, and I found through the Myers-Briggs Institute a scale that they use. It's a thinking feeling scale for intuitive feelings. And there's specific scales within that Myers-Briggs type about different kinds of intuitive knowing. So if I selected affective, which is, feeling over thinking, there's a scale that's specifically for that. Anyway, so that's, my question isn't exactly, worded, but I don't know whether or not to go into that, 2 to 5, exactly what point do I, 2 to 5 is a pretty big difference. That's, that changes where you are in that Benner's novice to expert theory. you have a 2-year mark, and then, so I might choose that versus 2 to 10.
So let's, Christine, go ahead. You start to say
No, I
something.
was just going to say, well, that speaks a little bit to your theoretical basis. So where in the literature and where theoretically do we kind of see that switch from novice to expert? And I'm sure there's some gray area in there, but that may be one thing to think about and guide where you sort of make that cutoff.
Okay.
And I was just going to say, this is an example of how you could phrase a possible specific question. So is there a difference in intuitive learning as measured by the Myers-Briggs for nurses? And you're going to have to decide which ranges based on the literature, as Christine said, but in nurses that have 2 to 5 years experience or greater than 5 or whatever. But that's what we're looking for as a specific quantitative question. And again, it's great that you found a way to measure. Any other thoughts or feedback for her? Thank you for going, Amy.
Thank you.
Anne, are you back, or should we go with Beth? Let's go with Beth.
Good morning. All right, my name is Beth Jones. I am currently the unit director in the Trauma Surgical Intensive Care Unit at the University of New Mexico. I have spent nearly all of my career in critical care. I started out as a paramedic and did pre-hospital for about 10 years before I went to nursing school. I loved being a paramedic. I hated transferring patients to a higher level of care that was not me, which was kind of what urged me to go to nursing school and probably has continued to be my motivating factor for continuing my education. I got my master's in clinical nurse leadership at the University of Arizona. And I really like how the academics and everything really just makes me kind of think outside the box and really push myself. And so here I am in the DNP program. So going back to my, my professional choices, I've dabbled a little bit in emergency medicine and progressive care. But my heart is very much in critical care. And so thinking about what my focus is for my project, even before COVID, really surrounded how do we create an environment that staff critical care is a pretty hard specialty to be in. And so we see a lot of staff turnover. And so really looking at how do we utilize resiliency training to empower the staff and give them the tools so that they're not leaving for lack of resources and support. So kind of my PICO question really has to do with in the critical care area, how does resiliency training compared to not receiving resiliency training influence nursing turnover? And so really looking at that, I think one of the biggest struggles that I've seen is that there is some data and surrounding the resiliency training, but that's a pretty broad term of resiliency training, and it means pretty different things to a lot of people. And so the literature that I've seen, the intervention varies drastically. And so I know I need to do a little bit more kind of data gathering on what that looks like.
Great. And who are you working with?
I don't currently have an advisor yet.
Okay. It's good to get someone just to run the PICO by so that they don't suggest changing it after you do all this work. And Peggy, do you have thoughts? Is Mary Beth a good person, or?
Well, again,
Beth, if we can talk offline and talk about, the thing is, some of these DMP students, these are the spring MITs, so they're not taking 80/20 with Quant 1.
Oh, okay.
And so that's why they don't have advisors yet. So
Okay.
Beth, I'll be happy to help you think through that.
Okay, great.
Great, thank you. All right. John, are you ready to go?
Yep, ready to go. So I'm John Sakar. I'm a second-year student in the PhD's program, specifically in the biobehavioral track. I've started or managed trauma and burn programs nationally and internationally for the last 15 years. Before changing to administrative role, I was a bedside nurse for 10 years in a PICU in Las Vegas and have served in the military for 11 years as a critical care flight nurse. Currently the trauma and burn program manager at Children's Hospital Colorado, where I've been for the last 6 years. I chose to enter research after participating in many multi-center trials through multiple different pediatric research groups, and I want to be the one asking the questions and determining solutions and not just letting the doctors do it, because they only come in with one view of things and not a more holistic view. So my overall research question is going to be exploring why parents or caregivers delay seeking care for a child who suffered a burn injury, specifically looking at how social determinants of health influence this decision making. For the purposes of this class, my research question is going to be, how do the epidemiology and outcomes of children whose parent or caregiver delayed seeking care for their burn injury differ from those who seek immediate care?
What variables are you thinking in the epidemiologic data?
Looking at, as far as if they're from a rural area, if they're from an urban area, looking a little bit more as far as what resources are, as far as those two different areas, looking at race, looking at age of the parents. If we can get some educational level, that would be amazing, just to kind of see where did they actually sit, but I'm not sure I can actually get that without crossing into the qualitative part and making it more of just to sit down and have a discussion with the families.
And what's the source of the data going to be?
It would be our standard clinic volume.
Just the charts then?
Pulling information out of EPIC or pulling it out of our database for the burn patients. Great.
Christine, you have thoughts?
I'm a former Air Force nurse as well, so just thinking, so you're just looking at burn patients that present for care to Children's?
Yes.
Okay.
The burn clinic here at Children's, either immediately or those who delayed seeking care in general for their burn injury.
Okay. And are you being specific on the type of burn, the severity of the burn?
I was gonna, for the purposes of this class, I was gonna quantify all that out once we do pull the data, but initially I'm just looking at, are they seeking immediate care or are they delayed, and then gonna look at the different characteristics between those two populations.
Okay. And then what are you looking at for outcomes?
As far as, do they need surgery following for something reconstructive? Okay. What was approximately their time to healing? And then what else did they have functional outcome differences when they actually appeared for, especially the delayed group, if they appeared for care, did they have a functional outcome difference? Like say they couldn't open their hand, they couldn't walk normally because they've scarred down and are unable to have normal range of motion over a certain extremity or joint.
Okay. And are patients referred, I assume, to your clinic from outside PCPs?
Yes, they come from hospitals, PCPs, pretty much all over the region they come to us.
Okay.
So I'm hearing multiple questions in there, John, and I think for clarity for this class, it might be good to focus on one of them, sort of like what I said to Christina in the beginning, just for clarity and to make this doable and successful for you. Maybe pick one. So I heard you say those epidemiologic variables that you described. You said rural, race, parents' age, education, and whether or not they sought care or delayed seeking care. So that would be a question that you could answer quantitatively from the data source you described. But then the patient outcomes piece seems like a separate question. And I don't know, I wouldn't make it that complicated for this course.
Okay.
I'd pick one or the other and be real clear on what the question is, how you're going to get the data, and how you're going to analyze the data, thinking through that in your mind, because that's all going to come later in the proposal.
Maybe think about it from what piece that you could look at in this course might move you forward when you get to your dissertation. What piece might be helpful to that?
Okay.
And it looks like we are due for our break. So let's take a break. 10 minutes, we'll get started again at 10:40, and then Ann, you're up, okay?
Okay, that sounds good. All right, thanks.
Are you feeling better, Bonnie?
I'm about the same, but you know, it's just this sinus stuff, so it's not a big deal.
Well, but I'm sure this drastic weather shift didn't help at all too, so.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just hanging on forever. We're cutting into some of your time, Christine. Are you going to be okay with this?
I think so. I mean, I might just have to.
We may need to juggle things tomorrow.
Okay.
But I don't know what your schedule looks like tomorrow. So.
Well, I guess it would depend when it might possibly fit tomorrow too.
Yeah, I don't.
Let me look at the.
Yeah, I don't know. We're going to have to be more time efficient, I guess.
Well, let's see.
We could delay the rest of the introductions to tomorrow if you would prefer. What do you think?
Well, I think everybody's sort of on a roll, and I think it's good to hear things and get that feedback. So I think it's good to just keep going. I mean, if I could squeeze it in a half hour if we have to.
Okay.
Or the other option is if you think there's time tomorrow.
Okay.
I mean, maybe we can see where we end up today, because how many more folks do we have?
We're about halfway.
Okay. But I think it's helpful to hear other ideas and
Yeah. Okay.
feedback. Okay.
Okay, I have 10:40. Time is flying. I don't see Ann back yet. Oh, there she is.
I'm here.
All right, you want to go?
Yes, my gosh, sorry you guys, of all the days for my heat to go out.
Oh no.
It's freezing in here. Anyway, so as I was saying before, I've been a pediatric oncology nurse for over 30 years. The majority of my career has been at Children's Hospital, Colorado. And recently I left clinical work to work in the Department of Nursing, Research, Innovation, and Professional Practice, where I do some policy work now part-time. But my heart and soul is pediatric oncology. And during my work with my patients, I realized there was we have an animal therapy program at Children's. We've had it there for many years called Prescription Pets, where dogs could come visit patients in the units while they were in the hospital. And the kids with cancer were not allowed to receive visits from these dogs due to infection risk. And so I saw a need to try to provide animal-assisted therapy to my patients in a way that would mitigate the risk of infection. So I came up with what's now known as virtual animal-assisted therapy. And I created a program where kids with cancer could be pen pals with dogs and cats who were also being treated for cancer. And I started this program almost 20 years ago, and it has continued over the years and evolved. And for many years, I relied on anecdotal evidence to keep it going. And then I got bit by the research bug, like Christina Baker shared earlier, through the Nurse Research Fellowship at Children's. And it was there that I discovered that I could actually start researching virtual animal assisted therapy and generate and publish knowledge in the area, because there isn't any out there. Quite frankly, there's nothing on a letter writing program with animals with a shared diagnosis experience and children with cancer. So I'm thrilled to say that I just published my first qualitative research study, where I interviewed patients with cancer who were part of the animal assisted therapy program. The name of my program is YAPS, which stands for Youth and Pet Survivors. And I found themes, connection, shared experience, friendship, among other things in my study. So now I have a foundation out there for the difference that virtual animal assisted therapy can make in this model. And my dissertation is going to be looking at the letters that I have accumulated over the years that patients have written to their animal pen pals. And the letters really serve as a data set. And I'm going to be looking at, what examples of quality of life are evident in these narratives? What themes can I find related to quality of life in these letters? So again, this is all very qualitative. And what I would love to do quantitatively in a perfect world would be to actually measure biomarkers of patients while they're reading a letter, for example. So what's going on when they go to the mailbox and get a letter and open it and read it? What's happening to their cortisol level, for example? So hypothetically, if I could send patients home with salivary collection kits, they could actually, we could measure their salivary cortisol while they're reading a letter. So that's one thought I had. And again, I don't know that I would ever do this in real life, but it would be, if I could do it in real life, it would be a fascinating quantitative study. I do have, as a prototype for this, I have a randomized controlled trial that was done at a Houston hospital, and they actually measured salivary cortisol on patients who were receiving visits from live therapy dogs. So if I could model, I could do a randomized controlled trial modeled after this study, but do it on virtual animal assisted therapy and do it while patients are opening letters. So those are my ideas.
That's a perfect example of taking your passion and force fitting your thinking to a quantitative question. So that's perfect.
Okay, good.
So the
I
way
feel really rushed, but that's what I came up with.
I would just say it's the question that I heard you say, is there a difference in or what is the impact of pet therapy letter on stress as measured by cortisol? Because it's not just the cortisol, but it's what is that cortisol measuring?
Right.
From your participation in the virtual pet therapy. So that would be, and thank you for doing that, because I know you also are passionate about where the state of the science is, and it's not there yet, but that's a perfect way of adapting your passion for and kind of force fitting a quantitative question for the purpose of this class. So
okay, good.
Other thoughts? Anybody have anything to add there?
I was just going to say that you could also add a measure in for pain or something else if you wanted to look at like one of the PEDS quality of life.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
Out there.
There is a specific PEDS QL for cancer.
Yep, and you could do that as a pre and a post when they're, you know, interacting with the pet or something like that to see if there's a difference too, or difference over time.
Well, and the pre and post is getting tricky because, I mean, you measure when they're reading the letter and then when's post, like the time that they're waiting for the next letter to come, or you know, I mean, that starts to get a little more complex. It's really easy when an animal's coming into your room, you can do a pre and post super easily, right?
I guess I was thinking more if they were interacting with the pet virtually, you could do a pre and post, but you could even just do, you know, a post or something too, and just have that as a descriptor to see what the levels were or something. There's lots of different ways you could think about that.
Well, the virtual interaction is reading and writing letters. So again, how do you define pre and post? You can really only define during, like at the time they're reading the letter or the time they're writing the letter.
Well, and this is getting a little complicated, but then you have to look at the measures and what they actually measure. And so it could be quality of life before they ever enroll in your program, and then quality of life after.
Exactly.
But
periods, you know, 6 weeks, 12 weeks or something during the program to see if there's a change too.
Yeah, and I mean, that's something, again, qualitatively, I'm going to look at quality of life measures in the narratives of the letters over time. But for this class, yeah, that's getting a little complicated, I think, for this class.
Yep.
And thank you, because I have to admit, I am really off kilter today with this thermostat issue in my house. So I feel like I'm not as articulate or as present as I would like to be today. So thank you for
I think it was fine.
Okay.
Hey, Mia, you ready to go?
I am. So hi, everybody. I'm Mia Roberts. I am in the 2019 cohort of the PhD program as well. I'm in the healthcare systems track. I am a pediatric nurse practitioner, and I have been practicing for the last now 8 years. I've predominantly been in federally qualified health centers for 3 years in New Orleans, Louisiana, and then for the last 3 years at Sheridan Health Services, which is how I sort of accessed this program and began to think about doing doctoral work with both Bonnie and Christine as my colleagues, which I was really fortunate to be able to practice alongside them. And throughout my career, I've always been really, really passionate about behavioral health integration in primary care. I have seen practices, or I've worked in practices that have not been integrated in that sense, with behavioral health providers and primary care providers working alongside one another. And then the clinic where I'm currently working at Sheridan, it has a very, very high level of integration. And I have seen what a difference that makes in terms of our patients accessing care in a timely manner. And that's sort of what sparked my interest. Specifically, I'm just trying to go along a little quickly here, but my question at this time is, what is the impact of the warm handoff on frequency of attendance at the initial behavioral health appointment compared to a traditional referral in adolescence? And what a warm handoff is basically the moment that a behavioral health need is identified in primary care. We are able to pull a behavioral health provider in the moment into that patient's room to get them set up with services. And so we all in clinic firmly believe that when a patient receives a warm handoff, that they are more likely to actually attend their first appointment and engage in behavioral health services. But there's been no research that demonstrates that. And actually in adult studies, it's been shown that it decreases the likelihood of their attendance at that appointment. So I'm just, excited to sort of study this phenomenon in adolescents specifically. I'm excited that my dissertation is sort of taking shape in a mixed method study. And yeah, that's me.
Great, thanks, Mia. People have thoughts for her?
I think this is great, Mia, and I'm so excited to see you doing this research too. So
Thanks,
I love it.
Christina.
All right, I think we are now up to Jennifer Rodriguez.
Hello. So I'm Jen Rodriguez. My background is primarily in critical care and trauma nursing. I heard Beth being from UNM, so I actually started as a baby nurse at UNM in all of their ICUs there in the neuro ICU, and then became an ICU float nurse there for many years. So hello, Beth. I loved that hospital. Since then, I had gone on to Seattle and practiced in critical care, and then now I'm in Colorado. And so during my tenure as critical care and trauma nursing, I oftentimes became a float nurse within an organization. And here in Colorado, it's very different than in New Mexico or Seattle. We have big, large-scale actual organization health systems. And so if you're familiar with Colorado, typically that's the University of Colorado or Centura or something like that, where they have multiple hospitals within that organization. And so during my time there, I worked for Centura for a while, floated to 9 different hospitals, all critical care across Colorado. And I started to really see a lot of variation in practice while I was there. And so even though they were the same,
you've frozen on us.
I'd go to all these hospitals, everybody had different IVs, everybody had different beds. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, sorry.
You're breaking up.
Oh, can you hear me?
Can now.
Okay. And so I saw a lot of variation across those organizations, from their IV catheters that they would use all the way up into their bedpans or wipes or whatever. So that actually sparked my interest. And so for the last 3 years, I've now been doing value analysis nursing for the University of Colorado Health System. And so we look at cost, quality, and outcomes when we look at standardization of practice and product across an entire health system. And so that's kind of what led me into becoming into the DNP program. In order to move up to higher executive levels within an organization, you have to have a doctoral degree. And also within that, that is where a lot of the standardization and decreasing of variation within an organization takes place. The most important thing you have to have is executive leadership backing, because people hate change. So something no one knows about me, and I actually have type D brachydactyly. So I have this little tiny, it's basically a fancy word for a short stubby thumb. So that's something interesting. And so for my actual PICO question for this class, I wanted to do it surrounding value analysis. And so my question is, what are the financial implications associated with utilizing a value analysis team review for standardization of IV catheters when compared to not utilizing one? And so kind of a interesting question to start it out before actually labeling that question would be something like, do we really need 32 different IV catheters? Kind of grabs the attention, and then I would answer that PICO question.
All right, thank you. Do people have thoughts for Jennifer? We had a little bit of trouble with your connection there, Jennifer. You broke up a lot, but it sounds to me like you have you've identified a good problem and approach from a quality improvement perspective. I don't know this literature, but it sounds like you do.
I do. There's not a whole lot of literature out there on value analysis teams. Unfortunately, this is an area of nursing that I don't think many people know about. I actually didn't know that it existed until I started looking into it and being, kind of answering that question. Why do we have all of these different types of products within the same organization? This doesn't make sense. I'm surely you could save a lot of money if you guys all use the same thing with your buying power. And so that's where I stumbled upon this job. I'm actually the regional manager for all of Southern Colorado for University of Health. So I have several hospitals under my umbrella. And when we do these large scale projects, we do look across the whole organization at standardization. But oftentimes we come in late to these. And so there's already work that's been done, potentially like so in IV catheters, a group would have already been looking at standardization. But when you bring us in, we're like, oh, hold on a minute, let's look at contracting, let's look at all the different parts and pieces. And then we can actually end up saving them a lot of money while also measuring their outcomes along the way.
Yeah, Christine or Peggy, do either of you have thoughts?
Yeah, I've talked to Jennifer before, and so I have a lot of background in this area, so I can work with Jennifer.
Thanks, Peggy.
Are you her advisor?
We haven't talked about it yet.
Oh, okay.
I'm not in that 80-20 class yet, so.
She seems like a good fit to me, but
yeah. So Jennifer, we can talk about it offline too. Anybody who doesn't, any DNP who doesn't have an advisor, I'll be touching base with you, and we'll figure out who it's going to be.
Wonderful.
Great. I think we're up to, is it Trouty? Am I saying your name right?
Hi, yeah.
Great.
Hopefully you can hear me. Hi, I'm Trouty Rose, and I am in Portland, Oregon, so on Pacific time. And we are dealing with wildfires right now, which I know a lot of you dealt with this summer. So we're playing the whole who's evacuating today game. So I work at VA Portland Healthcare System, which I'm very proud to be a VA nurse. And VA Portland is actually a magnet hospital. We just had our 4th site survey virtually, which is very interesting. I've been in oncology for pretty much my whole career, about 18 years. And I like to build programs. So I got my MBA, and I'm currently the Cancer Care Navigation Team Program Manager for Cancer Care Navigation across 3 states, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, and 7 sites. So I'm in the DNP Health Systems Leadership Program. So I really want to one day do like national strategy and policy. That's kind of my passion. At my facility, recently the nurse care coordinators, which are different than navigators. Navigations we consider more intensive case management, barrier focused health disparities, versus care coordination, which is attached to a service. They were recently asked by the director, what are your metrics? So they came to me, and we have to figure out for all these specialty nurse care coordinators like urology, ortho, what are their metrics? How do we evaluate what they're doing? And how do we know when they need more staffing? They're all in ambulatory care, so there's not a lot of models. There's a lot of literature that I'm very familiar with on the cancer navigation side. So for my project, what I want to do is kind of take this on. I'm gonna have to figure out how to scope it, and I'll have to talk to Peggy about an advisor. I'm in the project class this semester. But what I'm trying to do with the quant piece for now is pull what I think will eventually be metrics. So last semester I looked at the screening side, and this semester I'm proposing for my PICO questions in adult patients with cancer, and I'm focusing on cancer because all these specialties deal with cancer. How does nurse care coordination compared with no nurse care coordination affect timeliness of care from diagnosis to first treatment? There is some decent literature from the diagnosis to first treatment. It just shows different stuff. So I really want to dig into it and figure out what metrics might work for the care coordinators.
That was a spectacular question. I think the more time you have to think through these, going towards the end is probably a good thing, but that seems really like a great question to me. Peggy, thoughts? Christine?
I just have one question. So at what point during diagnosis and care do the nurse care coordinators get involved?
So it's usually at the time of high suspicion or the time they see something on a scan that looks like they're going to need to get that specialty involved. So since I'm looking at the specialty care coordinators, I'll do it at the time that the specialty gets involved.
Okay, so it's pretty early on in the process. Okay.
Yeah, and also in the VA, they're caring more because we have a Mission Act where veterans can have choice. So there's a lot of things with care coordinators and navigators about outmigration. So I think capturing them in this time period will be also relevant.
Great. Peggy, did you have something?
I was just going to say I agree. I think it's a very good question.
Oh, great. All right. So I think we're ready to move on to Jennifer Smith.
I will get my video started. Okay, good morning. So I'm Jennifer Smith. I'm also a VA nurse and very proud to serve our veterans. I'm currently the nurse recruiter at the St. Cloud VA in St. Cloud, Minnesota. It's been a wonderful role to help with nurse engagement, just advocacy for the VA as employment opportunity for new nurses. I am in the process of transferring to the Gainesville VA. I am taking a staff nurse position. Because of my DNP program, I need more flexibility with my schedule to do my hours, because I got my master's degree through the University of Colorado in veteran and military healthcare. So I came into this program with only 90 clinical hours. So I have a lot to make up for in the next 3 semesters. So I think the flexibility of being a staff nurse is really going to benefit me. My clinical background is cardiac nursing and pre and post-surgical patients. So I'm going back to work on a surgical ward. So I'm really excited and nervous about going back to the bedside. I've been away from the bedside for 4 years, so it'll be interesting to see how I transition back to that. Nursing has not been my first career. This is actually my 3rd go around of what I want to be when I grow up. I was a pharmacy technician when I first got out of high school. Then I was a real estate agent. And then when the market crashed in 2008, and I think most of you will think this is funny because I do, I needed a career where I could go to school for the shortest amount of time and make the most money. So I thought, oh, I'll become a nurse. I had never been a caregiver prior to that, except for my children. And super thankful that I fell into nursing absolutely backwards. I've basically been a full-time student since 2008. So going to school for the shortest amount of time didn't work out really well for my plans. So I'm passionate about veteran nursing. I'm passionate about our veteran patient population. And one of the things, and I've been working on my PICO question. I'm not quite sure how this can or can't relate to my project. I do have a faculty advisor. It's Mona Treball, Dr. Treball. She's going to be my faculty advisor. And part of the project will be to start a professional nursing organization for nurses that take care of veterans. And well, specifically, it won't necessarily be VA nurses, because all nurses that take care of adults take care of veterans, because veterans are in the private sector as well as in the VA system. So that is the premise of my project, because the overarching goal is to have veteran healthcare identified as a specialty. Similar to like critical care nurses, pediatric nurses, oncology nurses. So I'm kind of leaning toward my PICO question being like nurses that belong to professional nursing organizations compared to nurses who don't belong to professional nurses organizations. How does that affect the population specific outcomes? And I'll refine that a little bit more, and I would appreciate some feedback, but that's sort of where I'm leaning with my question.
What patient outcomes do you think might be impacted by a nurse's participation in this organization?
I think that the patient-specific outcomes, I'm not sure which outcome that I would want to measure, but I think it would probably more be toward a qualitative thing, or how they would measure their satisfaction with care or something like that. So for the purposes of this course, I'm just not sure. So it's really kind of where I have to drill down on what outcome I want to measure to see if being in a professional nursing organization, and I think I want it once, and I haven't done much of a lit review.
Mm-hmm.
So I think some of the literature will help me guide me to what outcome I want to measure.
Yeah. Christine, how about that?
Well, you might think about, is there a particular population? Is there a particular diagnosis? You know, the VA it's government, so it's pretty good with gathering data and metrics for outcomes. So there may be some data that's already there. And you'll also have to think about the nurses that you're working with, you know, where are they working? And that obviously would have to be somewhere that would impact that outcome. Conversely, you also might think about what level of engagement on the nurse's part in a professional organization might have an impact on something too, because when you belong to an organization, there's folks that are really involved or highly involved and folks that aren't. And presumably that might differ too.
The other thought I was just thinking as you were talking is maybe participation in the organization affects the nurse's retention, which would be a huge asset to the organization. So like you said, you need to look at the literature. That's absolutely true. But this seems like a feasible question. Peggy, do you have any thoughts to add, or anybody else?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know how much literature is out there, but I think it's a good question to ask.
I've done, in some of my previous coursework, I've looked into this, and there's, I actually think I have a.
And are you looking specifically at the literature for around veterans, or just in general about professional organization?
I was thinking that it would be generalized. I don't think that I would, because I just randomly have this one. It's role of professional organizations in advocating for the nursing profession. So this one was a good one that I used for a different course. I think it's funny that it was randomly on my desk, but so that would lean maybe more toward the nurse retention piece of it. So I wasn't thinking of doing it specifically for veterans, or because that organization doesn't exist yet. I mean, there's professional organizations that VA nurses belong to, oncology nurses, ER nurses, like there's tons of specialties within the VA, critical care. I mean, there's just tons of them, wound care. But I was thinking of being more broad so that I could demonstrate the value of creating a professional organization for nurses that take care of this specific patient population.
So you could look at how that membership impacts their practice, and then you could measure that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think your first step is to look a little more in depth at the literature. So You probably want to move that direction. And we probably need to scoot on to the next person. So thank you for going quickly. And Christy, I think you're up next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christy Tepshirani, and I'm a second-year PhD student. And I live in Denver, and I've been a nurse practitioner for, I think, about 4 or 5 years now. I started off working in an outpatient GI clinic, and then transitioned to a pre-op clinic evaluating complex patients before surgery just to ensure they're medically optimized. And then now I'm working on the Anschutz campus with a clinical research group that conducts numerous studies, essentially just focused on healthy aging, which is pretty interesting. So that's a little bit about me. And my research interest actually developed when I was working in the GI clinic. GI has a lot of idiopathic conditions. It's kind of a black box for that. And so one of the diagnoses that caught my attention is called functional abdominal pain. Functional just means idiopathic. So it's kind of a neuropathic type pain syndrome that's extremely common in the pediatric population. Up to 20% is what the literature says. And then in the adult population, it's estimated to impact about 1.5 to 2% of the population. And interestingly, FAP does tend to self-resolve in the pediatric population for unknown reasons. However, it does tend to persist it tends to be more ongoing in the adult population. And so it caught my attention for some reason more than the other idiopathic GI conditions I managed. I don't know why, but I hypothesized that perhaps it was caused by a virus, just because symptoms are characteristically neuropathic and medications to treat the disorder are neuromodulating in nature. And so I thought maybe it was like a latent virus that was capable of either being chronically active or having more of like a reactivation, relapsing, remitting phenotype, because I did tend to see patients who either had chronic symptoms or symptoms that would come and go, and the severity differed as well from minor to severe kind of debilitating type symptoms. So I ended up meeting a neurovirologist on the Anschutz campus named Dr. Nagel, and she taught me how to test for some of the latent herpes family viruses, namely HSV1, HSV2, and VZV. And so I tested a small handful of patients, and they all, I tested their antibody levels, which is what she recommended, IgM for acute, IgG for chronic, and they all were positive in some regard with one of those viruses or a combination of those viruses. And I started a few of them on antivirals. One of them had kind of an allergic reaction to the antiviral. She had a lot of other comorbidities going on, so that had to be stopped. But the other two tolerated the antivirals pretty good, and their symptoms almost completely resolved after about a month on antiviral therapy. So I decided that this is probably worth looking into more in depth and more of a controlled setting. So that's kind of what led me to pursue a PhD. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And then something I feel comfortable sharing. So I'm first generation Lebanese, and I speak Arabic, and I'm learning to read and write Arabic as well. So that's something unique about me. So thank you.
And did you tell us your specific research question for the purpose of this class?
Yeah, thank you. So my aims are gonna explore, I have two hypotheses. The first is that in patients with FAP, they're going to have elevated antibody levels for HSV1 only, because that seemed to be the most commonly positive virus that I found in my testing. And then the second hypothesis is that patients with FAP are going to have a combination of positive antibody levels for more than just one of the alpha herpes family viruses. And I'm going to look at the adult population specifically, because I am an adult Gero NP, and that is the population I feel most comfortable working with. So
Good, thank you.
Sure.
All right, so we're rounding out the bottom here. Amy, I think finally it's your turn.
Yes. Hello, I'm Amy Tekau, and I'm a psychiatric and addictions nurse practitioner. And I work at the university, and I wear many hats. So I teach undergrad and graduate mental health. I also work at Sheridan Health Services. We've been really trying to integrate mental health into primary care. And then I also work on a couple of grants to expand access to medication-assisted treatment for substance use disorders. And so the focus of my research is substance use disorders. And the reason why I became interested is I was working in a crisis center, and I had an older gentleman come in with 2 little boys. They were like 4 and 6, and I could tell that they were very sad. And so I started, asking what was going on. And the grandfather had told me that both the mother and the father had died of an opioid overdose. And he really wanted me to tell the boys that, their parents had died. And when I was like listening to the story, I just recognized it was like such a failure of the system, but a failure in terms of like how we treat substance use disorders. And so I just thought I never want another nurse to have that kind of conversation. And so I really got passionate about figuring out how to improve treatment for substance use disorders. But in the last year, I've really honed into the 2 minds theory, Dr. Cook's 2 minds theory, where it talks about how we have 2 minds, the intuitive mind and the narrative mind. And in behavior change, you would think that the narrative mind would be in charge because it's the slow, deliberate part of our brain. But in actuality, the intuitive system is more online. So that's fast and, again, intuitive, but it's not quite as deliberate. And through the semester, I found a lot of research that really kind of validates that in substance use disorder that the intuitive system is actually amplified and the narrative system is actually hypoactive. And so I really kind of want to understand like more specifically what causes this amplification of the intuitive system. So, and I know I have a lot of determinants in here, so I'm just going to kind of give you my question, then maybe we can pick the one that most resonates with everyone. But what I want to say is in individuals with substance use disorder, behavior change is more difficult because the intuitive system is amplified by baseline personality, biological, psychosocial determinants, and drug use as measured by personality testing, genetic phenotypes, and allostatic load. And so each one of those measures kind of relates to that specific determinant. So I just really want to kind of get more at it so that we learned in our class yesterday about the biobehavioral phenotypes. And so I think I'm trying to really get at a biobehavioral phenotype that really amplifies the intuitive system, that explains why behavior change is so hard. And it's not just like this moral failing, which I think perpetuates stigma in substance use disorders.
So this is a great example of a pretty complicated quantitative question that you are going to move forward with your dissertation. But for the purpose of this class, where you're just starting to learn kind of the basic analysis and the basic design and research methods. So what I heard you describing is going to require probably some analysis with some modeling, and that's beyond the scope of this class.
Okay.
So as you said, you can simplify to a more straightforward kind of question, and you could pick probably any one of those things that you wanted to look at as outcomes. Say, in substance use disorder clients, this outcome occurs compared to others, or you could you could just simplify the question some.
Okay.
So, do other people have thoughts about that? Because you've got a complicated question there that's going to require some modeling, and we're not doing modeling in this class.
Amy, I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
Sure. So in individuals with substance use disorder, behavior change is more difficult because the intuitive system is amplified by baseline personality, biological, psychosocial determinants and drug use as measured by personality, so like personality trait testing like Myers-Briggs, or genetic phenotyping, so that would be related to the biological, and then for the psychosocial, it would be allostatic load.
So you know, one of the things you do, the language because is a little bit difficult in there,
Okay.
because it helps to confuse. But you could, when you're going to go toward that more complicated modeling where you're trying to sort out all of this stuff, you usually start with looking at correlations between things. So you, for the purpose of this class, could say substance use disorder correlates with, and then pick a handful of variables.
Yeah, no, that's great. I like that. Yes, okay.
You guys have other thoughts?
It's Lorraine.
Hi, Lorraine.
So this is another one that I've been following closely from different partnerships with Amy for the progression of this. My question for the purposes of this course, I know you already have access to certain data. Of those three things you mentioned, which one, for lack of a better term, would be simpler for you to accomplish from what you have access to?
Well, I mean, probably the biological, but I'm really kind of interested too in like the psychosocial, the whole like social, you know, exclusion, the marginalization that can sometimes increase that allostatic load. So I think, I mean, I've been able to like find some of the research, and you know that it kind of aligns with my qualitative metasynthesis, you know, that we did together. So, I mean, I think I have enough research, I have enough literature on all of them. So I do think, though, I think for this course, I think I would like to maybe do more of that psychosocial and use that correlation, so that substance use disorder correlates with an increase in allostatic load, you know, which is, you know, essentially kind of a measure of, you know, that psychosocial piece that I'm thinking about. So, but,
that's also the most recent addition to the progress of what you're doing that I think you're most excited about.
I am, and it's because like NIDA has been kind of like saying that this is like an area of interest because they really want to understand like the social aspect of like substance use disorder.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Lorraine, I just want to clarify, you guys aren't going to be expected to carry out this project. All this is about writing this proposal.
Thank you. So, we were told that in Role of the Scientists too. I think Kathy Jankowski told us, pretend like you're in the land of make-believe and you could, within reason, accomplish what you're proposing to me.
Yeah. So it doesn't really matter whether the data already exists or not, because you're not, I mean, feasibility-wise, if you're going to do this for the dissertation, that's an important consideration, but for the purpose of this class, you're not expected to do this work. So I think we have one person left, and she's been patiently waiting. Charlotte, thank you for all your comments in the chat.
Hey, I think that's me with the W. I'm Charlotte. And I actually wrote mine out because I thought this was like an assignment to turn in, so I'll just read it to you too.
It is. It is due next week.
Oh, okay. Well,
the research question is.
Oh, no, I meant the introduction.
Oh, okay.
So I've been a nurse for 23 years, and I spent my nursing career in various acute care settings like the ICU, ER, etc. I'm an acute care nurse practitioner. My background as a nurse practitioner has been predominantly in palliative care and within the populations of cardiology and oncology. Whole person and caring nursing theories have informed my practice as a nurse. And about 3 years ago, I was reintroduced to Dr. Jean Watson's theory of human caring, and I studied under her and her team to become a Caritas coach. It was through this journey that I found out about the University of Colorado and the Caring Science Foci and the PhD program. I knew that I had more learning to do and research interests to explore, and they could be supported here. My husband and I moved from Montana to North Carolina during this COVID pandemic, and I'm presently in transition and jobs, and thus I'm embracing other roles in my life for the first time, that of a student, a wife, daughter, aunt, sister, and pet mom. My passion for nursing was birthed as a child from my exposure of visiting missionary nurses at my father's parish. And as a nursing student, I had the pleasure of serving others in multiple countries. I believe it was from this early diverse exposure that I now have the interest that I have in exploring untold stories of caregivers and marginalized people to tell their experiences of grief and loss to improve their quality of life and evolve to healing potential. So my dissertation interest is in different grief and losses that haven't been explored for informal caregivers of cancer patients. That's ambiguous loss and disenfranchised grief. And one of my aims is qualitative, was to explore how informal family caregivers experience disenfranchised grief. And as of right now, I'm looking at turning it into a quantitative question of, do caregivers of oncology patients, informal caregivers, this is the family member or a loved one that's not being paid, perceive their loss to be witnessed and cared for by another? And how I came up with the variables of witnessed and cared for is those are two attributes of disenfranchised grief that I found in my concept analysis of disenfranchised grief. And so the variables would be the informal caregiver, the witnessing, and as another variable, caring as a variable, and the one caring or witnessing, and I haven't identified who that other would be, if it would be a nurse, or it could be the someone who the caregiver identifies as a support system.
And how are you going to measure these variables?
Yeah, there's multiple tools. There's a caregiver burden tool, a Zaret tool that's been validated for caregivers of oncology patients. And what I was thinking about doing was looking at how, oh, let me tell you about the other tools real fast. There is the measurement of witnessing of disenfranchised grief, which looks at the perception of witnessing. And then there's multiple tools of perception of caring. One of them was developed by Dr. Watson, and I want to look at different caring tools that are out there. So I have three tools that I'm looking at, but I was thinking about looking at the two, how the variables of witnessing and caring correlate, and then how does the degree of the caregiver burden correlate with the perception of witnessing and or caring.
So those are multiple questions, all quantitative, they all would work. And I think you broke up a little bit throughout that, but I think you were telling us, do caregivers perceive their loss to be witnessed, and then something else, and then go ahead.
To be cared for by another.
Okay, and both of those were measurable with these measures that you talked about. So that would work just fine for this purpose of this class. Anybody have feedback for her? All right, we survived, and we left Christine exactly 30 minutes to get through a lot. So Christine, don't feel rushed, do what you can, and then we'll figure out what to do to finish up the rest.
Okay. So do we just want to go right into it, Bonnie?
I think we better.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm hoping folks can see that. Sorry, let me go back to the beginning. And I'm just trying to pull everybody up here. So Bonnie, certainly if you have anything to add as we're going through, please feel free to interject. And if there's any questions, please feel free. So really, we're just going to go over an overview of the design of what quantitative research is. So if we think about what the design is, Kurlinger said it's the plan and structure of investigation, conceived so as to obtain answers to research questions. So that's, you know, really good examples of what we've been talking about here today already. So what are the two basic purposes of a design? Well, it's to provide the answers to those research questions, and it's to control the variance. So what is variance? Simply put. Anybody?
Oh, what's the question and answer?
Variability?
So yes, it can be. So variance, it's an estimate of reliability. And if you remember, reliability is the extent to which a measurement is consistent and free from error. So variance is actually, simply put, it's a difference of scores in a data set. And numerically, there is a numerical way to calculate that. So let's say we are conducting a study and we're looking at blood pressures. If you're measuring a blood pressure in the same person 5 times, you would expect that those numbers would be a little bit different, correct? So yes, we would expect that those numbers would be a little bit different. And we'll talk a little bit more about the types of variance and the variance that's good versus the variance that maybe isn't so good. Okay, so if we think about the design, it also tells us what observations to make, how we should make those observations, and how we're going to analyze those observations based on quantitative representation. So we've talked a bit today about tools to measure things like pain, to measure things like coping. So those are examples of some of the things that we can actually operationalize and then measure. So if you think about the structure of research, think about an hourglass. So we're starting with a broad question. So several of us have come up with broad questions today, and we've given some suggestions to narrow that down, to think about something in a smaller or bite-sized piece that's you can operationalize. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to move your pictures around here, so I apologize. So then again, you want to narrow down and focus in on a smaller part of that question. Operationalize it. So how are we measuring it? How are we looking at it? How are we measuring to see if there's a change, if that's what we're looking at? I'm sorry, the UPS man just came to the door. I apologize. Then how are we going to observe what we're looking at, what we're trying to measure? How are we going to analyze that data? How do we come up with our conclusions? And how do we generalize that back to our questions? So the structure of research, and we've had some great examples today of different types. So what kinds of questions can we look at? Well, we can look at exploratory. So that's looking at what's the opinion of a group of people? What are the characteristics of a group of people? We can look at descriptive. How is that opinion related to other characteristics? And we can look at causal. So what intervention can change their opinion? So what's the cause and effect of something? So if we think about the major components in the process of research, we want to think about the problem. So what's the problem experienced? And then how do we conceptualize the problem? And we've had some great examples today about thinking through how do we experience that versus how can you conceptualize that then to think about measuring it. So the research question can come from a theory or an idea. A couple people mentioned theories and thinking about a theory around thinking about a problem. The hypothesis is stated in operational terms. So we've had some great examples of hypothesis today as well. And then thinking about the intervention or the cause. So what is the construct that we're looking at? How can you state that? How can you operationalize that as well? So then you think about the units. So what are we looking at? Who are we looking at? So are we looking in a population? If we're looking in a population, some folks mentioned they want to look at adults. If you're looking at adults, are they adults with cancer? Is it adults with cancer or a certain type of cancer? So also thinking about what the units you're looking at and how you're measuring those as well. Then you're looking at the outcome, the effects, and this is, you have to think about also your structure of your research, and if you're doing some type of intervention, or if it's more descriptive, you may not necessarily have effects per se, or if you're looking at correlations, that'll vary a little bit, but how those things impact that population that you're looking at as well. And then also looking at the design. So more in an intervention study, who's getting the program? So are you doing an intervention on a particular group, or is this a design where you're looking at just coming up with some of the general thoughts or describing characteristics of a group? And then when you're analyzing, how are you using that data to answer the questions that you're asking? Are you looking at a comparison between two groups? Are you looking at common findings in a group, depending again on your question and what you're looking at? And then how do you interpret that? So is this generalizable to the population? Where does it fill in one of those gaps? We talked a lot about gaps in literature today. Does it fill in one of the gaps in literature to help move our knowledge forward as well? So again, if we think about the structure of research, it's beginning with that broad question, narrowing it down, operationalizing it, doing our observations, then analyzing our data, reaching our conclusions, and generalizing back those questions. So if we think about variables that are in research, what are independent variables? Well, these can be things that cause something. So give me an example from one of your examples from today, what an independent variable might be.
One from mine could be non-English speaking patient.
Okay. Anybody else have any other examples?
One was the EHR access.
Okay.
For mine, it would be type of referral.
Okay, so great examples. So those are things that cause an impact on your dependent variable. So your dependent variable is your effect. So give me an example of an effect from some of those you just did.
So for mine, it would be like attendance at the behavioral health appointment.
Okay, great.
Mine would be an identified occurrence of obstetric violence.
Okay, right. So another way to think about a dependent variable is what are you measuring and what are you testing that you're looking for the effect. So those are great examples. And then we have an example of, this is one of Bonnie's studies where she looked at, her sample was nurse practitioners in school-based health clinics. And Bonnie, please correct me if I say this wrong. And her independent variable was training on obesity guidelines. And then one of the dependent variables that she was looking at as a measurement was a chart audit for documentation. So implementing training on obesity guidelines, one of the outcomes she was looking at was to see how the nurse practitioners changed their documentation or didn't change in the charts. Is that correct, Bonnie?
Yep, that's it.
So your independent variable is that training, and the dependent variable, what you're looking at for the outcome, is the change in the documentation in the charts. So several people mentioned theories today. So mid or middle range theories are some of those more straightforward ideas that stem from the discipline that can be used to undergird your research, how you're approaching research, or you can actually use some of the theories to actually test the theory in research as well. They lay between the working hypothesis and those grand theories. So somebody mentioned the grand theory of caring, which is a larger theory, where middle or mid-range theories tend to be a little bit more basic, where they have usable structures of ideas. And I put an example in here. Many of you may have seen Pender's health promotion model. So this is a mid-range theory, and Pender is a nurse, but it's looking at individual characteristics and things that might impact behavior if you're looking at behavioral outcomes and changing health promoting behavior. So this is just a nice model of an example of a mid-range theory to look at. And this could undergird where you're looking at something, where you're looking at certain characteristics that might impact health promotion behavior, might explain why one population is able to engage in a health promotion behavior versus another population won't, based on those characteristics. So it's just a nice basis to gauge research on as well. All right, so then we're going to talk a little bit about causality. So what is a cause of something? If you think about a cause, what is a cause? Just in broad terms. So in research, if you're looking at the cause and effect, what is your cause? Somebody give me an example of a cause from the examples we've had today.
So a cause is like the trigger, something that sets it off.
Okay. So it could be an event, right?
In Amy Teckow's example, an intuitive mind, dominant intuitive mind would be a cause of either complication in treatment or increased likelihood of substance use disorder, or however she chooses to say what the effect is, but the cause would be a dominant intuitive mind.
Right, exactly. So it can be an event, it can be a process, it could be a state, and in that example, it's probably more like a state. And then you look to see what is an effect. So what is an effect?
The outcome.
Okay.
Or it can
Right.
be the change that happens because of the cause.
Exactly, right. It can be the change, it can be the change in the event, it can be a change in a process, or it can be a change in a state, exactly. So if we think about a causal relationship, the cause is typically preceded by the event, so that's a temporal order. So for example, if you're looking at research where you're doing an intervention to increase physical activity, you have to have a state of physical activity before the intervention, and then hopefully you have a change in the degree of physical activity after. You can have a cause that's related to the event that can be covariation. And then you also have to make sure that within that causal relationship, there's no other plausible alternative explanation or another competing hypothesis. So if we think about causation, correlation, and confounders, so how many of us have heard the phrase that correlation does not prove causation? That's a common thing that's out there. And when we're looking at research, we have to think about correlation, and that when things are correlated, they aren't necessarily, there isn't necessarily causation. And I actually have an example here. So I don't know how many of you have seen these graphs. They actually have books where they've published these. So if we look at this graph, this is a correlation of data points across time for the letters in a winning word in the National Spelling Bee, and the number of people killed by venomous spiders, which obviously are two things that obviously don't go together. But if you look at the chart, you can see that there are fairly similar patterns with those two things. So one could say that they are correlated because they have similar patterns and data points. However, clearly the number of words in a spelling bee word and the number of people killed by venomous spiders are not, there's no cause. They don't cause each other, right? So that's just an example of correlation does not prove causation in a practical sense. So then we also have to think about confounders. So what are confounders? If you're looking at a study, what is something that might confound your results?
So for me, it might be that the experience of the school nurse might make the difference and not really just access to the EHR.
Okay, that's a great example. Anybody else have another example? So really, it's an extra variable that you don't account for in it that can change your results. So for example, if we are doing an intervention with parents to increase breastfeeding duration, one of the confounders possibly, if we don't control for it, could be something like maternal education level. So you could theorize that mothers that have a higher educational level might engage in prolonged breastfeeding more than mothers who have a lower educational level. But that's something that you could control for. How about ability to manipulate? What do you think about manipulating a study? So from the examples today, what is something that you might be able to manipulate in your study? To potentially
You mean like in mine, some nurses have access to the EHR and others don't, or do you?
Okay, so you could manipulate where you have folks that only have access, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you manipulate time, like within, X amount of time, or
right.
Is that manipulative, or
Right.
can you manipulate that?
Right. You can manipulate time. Okay.
Location.
Yep. Great examples. Great examples. And then if we think about moderators and mediators, I put a little example in here. So a moderator is something that's a variable that affects the strength between your independent and your dependent variable. A mediator is something that causes mediation between the independent and dependent variable. So if you think about that as a middleman, or maybe something that explains why there's a change. So if we look at the example here of, we can theorize that exercise or increased exercise would have some impact on weight loss. So if we think about a moderator and a mediator, what of these in this list can actually impact something that could mediate the relationship between exercise and weight loss? So is age something, is that a moderator or a mediator? So if you're entering an intervention where you're increasing exercise, can we change somebody's age?
Oh, it's based on changeability, so no.
No, so you can't change somebody's age, obviously. So is that a moderator or a mediator?
It's a mediator because you can't change it, right? Or is it the
I was
opposite?
going to say moderator.
It's a moderator because technically it comes before the exercise, right? So if it doesn't impact here and it comes before the exercise, then it's a moderator.
So the moderators are the fixed ones.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. How about caloric intake? Is that a moderator or a mediator? So if you're increasing your exercise, what might that do to caloric intake?
Mediator?
Yeah, it's a mediator because theoretically, if you're increasing your exercise, you're burning more calories, you may become more hungry, so you may eat more. So that could be a mediator in a study. How about something like gender? Is that a mediator or moderator?
Moderator.
That's a moderator, yep. And then how about prior weight? Is that a moderator or a mediator?
Well, that's fixed. So it's a moderator, right? Because it's where they started.
Yep, because it comes before
Mm-hmm.
the exercise. And then how about well-being?
Moderator, because it comes before again.
Well, so theoretically, if you're exercising, might that have an impact on your well-being?
It could change it.
Because can that cause a mediation between your independent and your dependent variable and explain why you might have more weight loss?
Yes.
Yeah, so that one's actually a mediator. Okay, so just, I know we're talking a little bit more about cause and effect here and experimental, but just a quick reminder that there are the different types of quantitative study designs. And as we've talked through them today, a lot of people have different types of designs that they're potentially looking at for this course. So again, there's the descriptive, where you're looking to describe something. There's the exploratory, where you're looking at relationships. A lot of folks talked about correlation. And then experimental, where you're looking at cause and effect. And really the gold standard for Quant is the double-blind randomized clinical trial, which is not necessarily something that folks are doing for this course or even in a dissertation, depending on what you're looking at. Okay, so effectiveness versus efficacy. So efficacy is a trial that tests if an intervention does more good than harm when delivered under optimal conditions. The effectiveness is a test if an intervention does more good than harm when delivered under real world conditions. And so really when we're doing research, which of these are we, what conditions are we really under?
You mean optimal conditions?
Well, are we often under optimal conditions?
No.
No, we're not doing a lot of research in the lab per se. So what's an example of a real world condition that folks have used today?
I guess one would be is how does like telehealth and mental health work in the post-COVID world? That's
a
real
great
world.
example. That's a great example. And then how many folks have heard of the max-min-con principle, where we're looking again at the variance? So if we're thinking about, we want to maximize the systematic variance. So the variance of the dependent variable that's influenced by the independent variable. So what does that mean? So if we're manipulating something in a study and we're looking at the dependent variable and the independent variable, do we want to have variance between those?
Yes.
Yes, right, we do. So if we're doing an intervention, if we go back to the exercise and weight loss and we're doing an intervention in between, do we want to see a change with the weight? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So we want to maximize that systematic variance. We want to minimize the error variance. So error variance is the variability of measures due to random fluctuations. So we want to reduce these errors through controlled conditions. So of the examples that we had today, what might be a way to reduce error on some of the measurements of things that you all proposed?
Just the utilization of an evidence-based validated.
Using validated tools.
Right, using validated tools. Anybody else have another specific example?
Sample size?
Mm-hmm. Great.
Demographics?
Yep. Great examples. And then you also want to control your extraneous variables. So things like things that you're not trying to intentionally study, outside variables, or things that might impact what you're finding in your study. So can anybody think of an example from what they proposed today? Where you might have an outside variance.
So I'm not sure if this completely sort of fits, but for my potential design, if you look at the different types of referrals, because of COVID, we now do a ton of virtual warm handoffs. And now actually people can do a lot of telehealth for their appointments, which would control for transportation issues. And so just in light of everything, I now would have one of my independent variables, or one of the types of the referral is now includes a virtual component to try to eliminate the either transportation barriers that could potentially change the outcome. I don't know if that works.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. And having the telehealth is actually something then you could build into your design as another independent variable.
Yes.
Exactly. Anybody else have any other examples or thoughts?
This is Jen with that that is doing the project on value analysis. Would an example of that be like physician preference?
Yep. That's a good example. And so how might you control for that?
I'm not sure. Now they get their way.
Jennifer, you don't have to because you're doing a quality improvement project and not research. So.
Oh, okay. But if it was a research project, how might you control for that?
A physician governance structure.
Okay. Good. Anybody else have any other examples?
And let me just chime in here. The important thing for the DMP students when we're talking about this, critique the articles you read to see if they did a rigorous control of possible extraneous variables, so you know whether or not this is really solid science or if it's a little bit weaker.
And that's a great way to think about it, Bonnie. So, and I'm sorry, I've tried to do this really quick and dirty in 20 minutes. So if there's any questions on this, please feel free to, I guess, post it in the course, Bonnie. Is that okay? Or reach out with questions?
Yeah, that's good. Yep. Okay.
But again, I think anytime you're looking at critiquing any research and you have an assignment coming up, this is a good way to look about the structure of the research, how they did it, to think about that. And also for the DNP, like you mentioned, as you're looking at things and thinking about it, looking at these components and critiquing that. So any questions from anybody?
There's just a comment to have the slides available for them, so we can absolutely do that. You guys have been amazing. This has been 2 really long, kind of fast and furious days. So thank you to everybody for the feedback you've given each other, the participation. Peggy, I can't thank you enough for giving us 6 hours of your time this week. It's so helpful to have your feedback. And Christine, thanks for the shortened lecture, given the importance of hearing what everybody's proposing. Are there any last questions, comments?
I just wanted to thank you for how you're presenting the course in a very non-threatening way, because I would have to say that when I read the statistics for the terrified, I thought, well, yep, that's me.
Yeah, it's our intent to help you through this. We understand, we do understand. You're all coming from different places, but I think both Christine and I know for sure Peggy, all value the collaboration of these two groups together. And so we're going to provide whatever we can to help you be successful. I will publish and try to post the recording too in case anybody needs it. And I think some of you have other places you need to scoot off to. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
And Christine, do you have time this afternoon to chat about the groups?
Sure.
Right, I will get this publishing and then